Hello everyone, Eternal Flame here, and today I'm here to cover something that I've been wanting to cover for a while, which is the strength of 15-finger Yuji Kuna-Meguna. The main reason why I want to cover this is because a lot of people really heavily downplay how strong 15-finger Sukuna actually is in both of these vessels, and they don't actually understand how strong this man is, because in my opinion, I think he is still the second strongest in the verse, and the only character that is actually stronger than him is Gojo, but I want to explain why I think that is the case. Now, I'm going to go somewhat in-depth with his scaling, but I'm not going to go fully in-depth with his scaling because I do eventually want to make a full-on How Strong is Sukuna video. Instead, the way I want to frame this is putting Sukuna against basically who I consider the top 10 in the verse pretty often, and showing why 15-finger Sukuna destroys most of these people. Which the people I'm going to talk about not in order is going to be Kenjaku, Yuta, Yuki, Yorozu, Makidash Toji, Yuji, Hikari, and then finally Kashimo. However, the way I'm going to approach this is as I go over 15-finger Sukuna's scaling, I'm going to compare him to these certain characters, and as I go over his scaling, I'm going to explain why he ends up scaling above them. Now, before we even get into 15-finger Sukuna's feats, he actually has some statements that also make him already incredibly impressive, which is the fact that we know if the prison realm plan failed back in Shibuya, Kenjaku's backup plan was to utilize Sukuna in order to take out Gojo. It should be noted the Sukuna he was planning to make would have been a 14-finger Sukuna, not a 15-finger Sukuna, because Mimiko and Nanako had the 15-finger that they fed to Yuji, while Jogo only fed 9 fingers to Yuji. This means that Kenjaku is rather confident that 15-finger Sukuna is capable of taking out Gojo in Shibuya. Now, I don't actually think that 15-finger Sukuna is capable of taking out Gojo in Shibuya. However, what is more important is the fact that Kenjaku believes that if him and all the disaster curses jumped Gojo together, they wouldn't stand a chance, despite the fact that Kenjaku has an open barrier domain, and there are several domain expansion users with them, and Mahito can't get hurt unless you're aware of the soul. He believed that none of them would stand a chance against Gojo unless they jumped him. However, he did believe Sukuna had a chance. This by extension should put 15-finger Sukuna above Kenjaku because of the fact that he believes 15-finger Sukuna has a chance, while he thinks he himself would get obliterated even with the help of all the disaster curses. So that does make Kenjaku the first to be knocked off the list by his own admittance. Which this should also be noted, this Kenjaku was also probably a stronger one than the one we actually saw fight against Yuki. The main reason for that is because they would still have Kurorushi at that time as well, and that wouldn't have been released into the Culling games. So this Kenjaku should be even stronger than that one, and he still wouldn't stand a chance. Which, speaking of, this single statement should also knock Yuki off the board as well, mainly because while Yuki might have a lot more physical force than Kenjaku, Kenjaku was able to make sure that none of her hits landed after the first one, and fight her pretty evenly. Even if you do think that Kenjaku is much weaker than Yuki and only really won because of the open domain, Kenjaku and Yuki are still pretty relative in stats, and Sukuna is just massively above him by Kenjaku's own admittance because he believes he would stand a chance against Gojo. So without even having to go over any of Sukuna's fights, we already have Yuki and Kenjaku knocked off the board. However, now we have that out the way, we can go into his first actual battle, which his first actual battle is against Jogo. Where in that battle, he's absolutely blitzing Jogo, tearing off his limbs, and just having fun with him and toying around with him, where Jogo can't land a single hit against Sukuna. Now, the two most impressive parts about this is Sukuna is able to tear through each of Jogo's techniques. However, the more impressive thing is the fact that he's able to blitz around Jogo. It should be remembered, Dagon considers Jogo around the same speed tier as Naobito. Now, he does think Naobito is faster, but there is some uncertainty there, implying a level of relativity between the two. Naobito is the second fastest sorcerer behind Gojo. Which means 15-finger Sukuna has enough speed to bully someone who should be around the same level as the second fastest sorcerer of the modern era, which that is kinda crazy. However, it is most certainly consistent with what we're going to get into later in the vid. Up next, Sukuna fights against Mahoraga, but this fight kinda has the issue of Mahoraga only really scaling to Sukuna, and it being debatable if Mahoraga gets stronger with the fact that it's tamed when it fights against Gojo, so you can't really argue whether Sukuna actually powered up Mahoraga or not. However, this does show Sukuna's intelligence because he's able to quickly figure out how to fight against an opponent who is adapting to every single one of his moves. However, because there's not much more we can say about this, we're going to move on to the next thing that we need to discuss, which the thing that's up next is a statement that is usually used to actually weaken the perception that people have on 15-finger Sukuna. Where Yuji tells Yuta, "If I ever switch with Sukuna again, don't hesitate to kill me. I think you could do that." However, this doesn't have to be a pure power statement. After all, there are several ways that you could interpret this. For example, if it looks like Yuji is about to swap with Sukuna, Yuta can go in and execute him before they can finish the swap. Or if Yuji ever swaps with Sukuna again, after Yuji gets back control, then Yuta can execute him. Or this could just be him saying that he knows that Yuta won't hesitate to kill him at all. But most of all, this statement can also just not be true and Yuji not knowing Sukuna's full power. After all, when someone is massively stronger than you in JJK, it's actually pretty hard to tell how strong they are. After all, we saw this before, and when Yuji sensed Yuta's curse energy amount, he thought that he was Gojo. So the statement wouldn't actually put Yuta above Sukuna, especially considering Yuji at this point has no idea what Yuta's abilities is, and all he knows about him is he has more cursed energy than Gojo himself. However, up next we can go into a feat where Sukuna is inside of Megumi's body rather than inside of Yuji's body. And in his body, he is able to fight against both Maki and Yuji at the same time in 2-1-4, and that sounds very impressive. However, there's something even more impressive about it that makes Sukuna that much more powerful, which is the fact that Sukuna is only at 10% of his output when he does that, if not less. The reason I say it could be less is because when Sukuna lands a Dismantle Wave on Yuji, he says he's at 10% of his output and dropping, which means he could be at even less when Maki shows up and when Maki, Sukuna, and Yuji are all fighting at the same time. It should also be noted, Megumi is a weaker physical body than Yuji himself is, and we know thanks to things like Miguel versus Gojo, that the physical body does matter when it comes to curse energy reinforcement and helps it that much more. So if 15-finger Meguna is able to do this, then 15-finger Yuji Kuna should also be able to do this, if not do even better. This does end up crossing Maki off the list as well, because I think if Sukuna is able to go pretty evenly with Maki at 10% of his output, I think a full power 15-finger Sukuna would absolutely throttle Maki for good reasons. The same goes for Toji, because while Toji does have a better set of weapons with the Inverted Spear of Heaven, which would deal with Cleave and Dismantle, I just think that would make it a little bit more difficult for Sukuna, but I still think he'd win nonetheless. And you also can't really argue that Maki and Toji can get stronger, or at least there's no proof for Maki and Toji being able to get stronger, so they would still be the same level of strength. Now I'm not going to cross Yuji off the list yet, mainly because he does get much stronger through the Shinjuku Showdown, so we're going to talk about that Yuji later in. However, up next that's rather impressive that Sukuna does succeed in doing is one-shotting Ryu Ishigori. Now I didn't include Ryu in my list of the top strongest people, however I do view Ryu as one of the top strongest, easily in the top 15, so I think it's really important to mention him, mainly because of how powerful his curse energy output is. However, when Sukuna went to full power with his cleave, he was able to one-shot Ryu. However, it should also be noted output does affect the potency of Cleave, because most people do assume that Cleave is a durability negating attack, and while Cleave does have some durability negating properties, it does clearly have limits, mainly because a normal Cleave could not cut through Ryu. However, when Sukuna put the full output into Cleave, it was able to cut through Ryu. Furthermore, nerfing Sukuna's output has effects on his Cleave throughout the entire battle, because if it didn't have effects, then several characters would be dead. So Sukuna does have durability negating properties with Cleave, however I don't think it's as potent as people actually think it is. Now this feat will be rather important for something we discuss later into the video, but I'm going to put that on hold for now because I'm going to get into one of the easier people we can cross off the board, which is Yorozu. The main reason we can cross Yorozu off the board rather easily is because of the fact that Sukuna fought Yorozu as 15-finger Meguna while only using Megumi's 10 Shadows technique, and it's repeatedly implied throughout the entire battle that if Sukuna decided to use his own curse technique, Yorozu wouldn't stand a chance against him. So I think it is pretty easy to just see Sukuna scales above Yorozu. Like, most of Yorozu's good scaling comes from the fact they fight Sukuna, so I don't think it's that contentious to say that Sukuna's above Yorozu. So now that we got the ones that have directed minions that they are weaker than them, or just straight up have already fought Sukuna and lost out the way, we're going to get into the ones that you need to develop scaling chains for, or just relate characters to, in order to actually explain why they are weaker than Sukuna, which the first two I want to talk about is Yuta and Yuji. Now, as much as I would love to say that Yuta versus 15-finger Sukuna is some close near-death matchup where Yuta can use his techniques and do things to outplay Sukuna and make them close, it's sadly not, because of one statement that Sukuna says in their domain battle that makes it really clear that Yuta is not anywhere close to 15-finger Sukuna. And that statement is pretty simple. Sukuna says that Yuta, Kotsu, and Yuji are still less durable than Ryu, which means Sukuna should be capable of one-shotting Yuta with just a simple full-power cleave. Now, there have been some arguments to try and debunk this statement, but sadly all the arguments really do is help Ryu and not actually Yuta, where most of the arguments is that Ryu was mental nerfed in that moment because of Sukuna's curse energy presence. However, that doesn't really help Yuta or Yuji, that only really helps Ryu, because of the fact that all Sukuna would know is this mental nerf to Ryu. Ryu and a normal Ryu could take a full power cleave, that wouldn't really help him, because Sukuna would only be able to compare Yuta and Yuji to the mental nerf to Ryu that he ends up one-shotting. So what this means is all Sukuna would need to do is land one full power cleave, and Yuta should be dead or at least taking very, very critical damage. Or he can land several full power cleaves and it's going to wipe out both Rika and Yuta. The other issue is the two of them should be on relative speed levels, if not Sukuna is a bit faster due to his ability to keep up with Maki, so you can't really go the argument route of just Yuta's going to repeatedly dodge Sukuna as well, because eventually Sukuna will land enough hits. Furthermore, Sukuna still also has the domain expansion that he can use in order to win against Yuta's domain expansion. Now, I will say I do think that Yuta in Gojo's body has a much greater chance. However, I don't really want to talk about that Yuta, mainly because Yuta in Gojo's body is so contentious on how he scales that might be an entire different subject for a video. So just pretend that doesn't exist. Yuji right now is kind of in a similar boat to Yuta. While Yuji has gotten a lot of amps through the black flashes that he has landed, and he has gotten quite a bit stronger, I don't think Yuji has gotten so much stronger that he would be above Ryu now in terms of durability. Furthermore, scaling Yuji directly to Sukuna is very difficult, mainly because Yuji works to nerf Sukuna. However, I will say Yuji is one of the best chances against this Sukuna, mainly because of his ability to nerf him. However, just because Yuji has a good rock, paper, scissors counter to Sukuna doesn't really make him stronger than him, because we see the fact that Sukuna is still doing pretty well despite his output being massively nerfed right now. And it's really hard to scale where Yuji's domain would do in a clash against Sukuna. However, because of the fact that it's a new domain, I am going to give the advantage to 15 Finger Sukuna, mainly because Yuji had just awakened the domain. So while Yuji is the best matchup against Sukuna, he still ends up losing pretty badly in my opinion. Hikari also gets dealt with pretty fast because the best you can really scale Hikari to is around the same level, if not unquantifiably above Yuta, mainly because of Yuta's own statement. However, even with that in mind, I don't think that's high enough, and at best you end up having Hikari surviving for the 4 minutes and 11 seconds in Jackpot, assuming his domain is able to activate while Sukuna is breaking his domain and he doesn't actually kill him during the domain clash, and during that time Hikari has to just survive in Sukuna's domain with his admittedly better than Gojo level of RCT, which I don't think is going to put Sukuna down in that time, and Sukuna will just eventually finish him off when that Jackpot is done, assuming he even gets that far. And now finally Kashimo, who Kashimo himself is the weirdest character to scale in JJK, mainly because of how much headcanon surrounds him and how much you have to read into his narrative to really debate on how strong or weak he is. Basically, the two things you need to answer in order to answer Kashimo's scaling is if you think Sukuna was going to transform on his own anyways, or if you think Sukuna had no intention to transform into his true form, and that Kashimo forced him into his true form. However, that doesn't really take away from the fact that it could be very well possible that he would have transformed to his true form either way. Then you also have to assume that because Sukuna respected Kashimo as a person and his mentality, that he ended up going all out on him, and that was his way of showing love. You can't really say that Kashimo is going to be capable of blitzing 15 Finger Sukuna, mainly because we see what should be a much weaker Sukuna, because we know the more damage your body is, the weaker your curse energy output and curse technique is. That Sukuna ends up dodging several of Kashimo's attacks. So the best you can really get Kashimo to is saying his durability scales to Sukuna's physical blows at full power, but even then that's kind of contentious in itself. However, Kashimo doesn't at all scale to Sukuna's full power of cleave and dismantle either, because he did use a normal wave of dismantles to take him out at maybe full power. He does also have the feat of dodging the World Slash, which might also be impressive, mainly if you believe that Kashimo heard Sukuna's warning to move out the way first. However, Kashimo's scaling is very contentious, a lot of it is debatable. So at best you can get Kashimo's durability to be around that level, however I don't think you can get Kashimo's other stats to be on that level, and at worst case scenario, 15 Finger Sukuna just domain expansions GG no Reese Kashimo. And while yes I know he has Hollow Wicker Basket, that Hollow Wicker Basket is going to get torn down because Kashimo doesn't have the ability to keep that hand sign active while he fights him. And I think I got everybody who was commonly put in the top 10 for JJK. I know there are other characters like Miguel, but I don't think I need to convince anyone that Miguel doesn't stand a chance against 15 Finger Sukuna. I don't think I need to convince anyone that Mahito doesn't stand a chance against him either. We saw the fight with Jogo, so that's not an option. We saw Uro just be so terrified of Sukuna's pure raw cursed energy that she decided, yeah, I'm not going to fight that thing, I'm going to curl up like a ball in fear. The only character that I miss is Yuta in Gojo's body, however I want to save where that one scales for a different day. However, that's my opinion for why I think Sukuna is the second strongest in the verse even at 15 fingers. Now I do think 15 Finger Sukuna loses to Gojo, but I think it'd be much more difficult than a lot of people actually think it would be. Of course, I mean specifically Shibuya Gojo and not Shinjuku Gojo. I think Shinjuku Gojo absolutely destroys 15 Finger Sukuna, but Shibuya Gojo is a little bit more debatable, mainly because he doesn't have the domain counter yet. However, that's about everything. If there's any character that I missed, comment down that character below, and without further ado, I'ma see you all later. Have a good day. Peace.